Disclaimers. 1. The content shared in this podcast is strictly for informational purposes and should not be construed as financial or legal advice. 2. The opinions expressed by the hosts and guests are solely their own and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. 3. None of the projects or companies discussed should be considered as endorsements or recommendations. 4. While efforts are made to ensure accuracy, the information provided may not always be up to date or entirely reliable. It is advisable to conduct independent research and seek professional guidance before making any financial or legal decisions. 5. The hosts and guests of this podcast shall not be held liable for any consequences or actions resulting from the use of the information provided. 6. All content, including text, graphics, and audio, is protected by copyright laws. Unauthorized reproduction or distribution is strictly prohibited. 7. Any discussions on sensitive topics aim to foster inclusivity and respectful dialogue, but differing opinions should be expected and not attributed to the podcast creators or sponsors. 8. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree to these disclaimers, and you are responsible for your own interpretation and application of the information presented.
Welcome, everyone. This is episode number 3 of the Intersection4 podcast. We have your usual crew here today. You have Hamis, founder of Plus 21. We have Brendan, founder of Athena Intelligence. And you also have me, a random engineer and also just a random technologist, reading a lot and exploring a lot of the frontier technologies and discussing with these fantastic brains that we have present. We're going to be talking about Threads, so the latest Instagram Twitter competitor. Brendan has a hard start in 15 minutes, and I want your input into the Threads discussion topic. So let me share my screen. So Threads, as Slack replacing for design for marketers. I think it's just making a side joke here. This is actual Threads.com. It's different than Threads and Instagram app on the App Store, which is the Twitter killer, whatever that we're going to discuss. Mm-hmm. But I think this company must have seen the biggest uptick in traffic that they've seen in their entire history. Yeah. So I just think it's like a really interesting, and this happened too during the pandemic, where there was a Zoom and there was a Zoom technologies for the actual Zoom company. Mm-hmm. The Zoom, the other Zoom, had like a huge uptick in stock price because people were just confused. So
yeah,
I think
their domain is probably worth. Yeah, their domain is probably worth more than they put into that company.
100%. But so okay,
I need to watch this movie tonight on the right-hand side too. They're probably getting a bunch of views. It's drama war.
So Threads. So quick overview on Threads. In case you missed the news and the fuzz over the last week, Meta, Instagram's parent company, launched a new company or new product, should I say, called Threads, which is pretty much the same as Twitter. It's the same idea of Twitter is a social media, text-based social media. The company saw the app saw 30 million downloads in the first 24 hours, and it reached 100 million downloads in the first week. This makes it by like a lot the most downloaded app in history. There's rumors. There's this company called there's this platform called Blind, which is like a platform for tech employees to discuss. I can share here in a second. But basically, there's rumors in Blind that Threads was built by a team of 10 to 20 people in a handful of months, which is in and of itself a huge deal. Like the fact that a company like Meta was able to build a full-on product, and there's some caveats that I guess we should mention later on about the quality of Threads compared to Twitter. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they were able to build something like this in a handful of months with such a small team is a really interesting changing phenomena. And I think this is not the first time that something like this is happening, that a big company is starting to deliver with smaller teams in a leaner and faster way. I think this was started by when Elon took over Twitter, and then Twitter started shipping a lot faster, and Elon laid off a bunch of people, like 80% of the workforce was laid off. I think it's really interesting to observe that big companies are starting to realize that you don't need teams of hundreds of people to deliver on product results. You just need a core team of highly dedicated people and highly skilled people to deliver in a timely manner. And I also think that the need for speed in tech has been resurfaced by the recent AI race that we're seeing. So everybody's realizing we got to move faster, we got to ship faster, and people are going leaner and faster. So it's just kind of an interesting thread to see. Mm-hmm. The last thing that I would point out here is that the vast majority, and this is the screen that I'm sharing here, the vast majority of the news that I've seen is related to Elon. So it's interesting to see how the media is framing Threads as a better alternative to Twitter, not on the merits of the product, but on the merits of the founders, saying Threads is going to be a happy place and Elon is this extremist that nobody likes, and then we're going against Elon and we're going to elevate threats. So it's just really interesting to see how the different perspectives are happening. So as Twitter continues to implode, advertising pin their hope on Twitter, or Meta Threads has Twitter on the ropes, or anyhow, just interesting to see the dynamic of how Elon is being framed, and how so many people in traditional media outlets is like Elon, and then the media is heavily favoring Threads as a better alternative to Twitter. I'll pause here. I want to get the pod's original thoughts on the
Go ahead,
Threads
Brendan.
launch.
My two quick comments about the rise to 100 million downloads, as well as this 10 to 20 person team, I think is completely BS. And the reason for this is twofold. One, what a download means today was completely different what a download meant a year ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. People are on their phones more. The whole world's connected. So if you adjusted, like the same way we adjust for inflation, if you adjusted what a download looks like today versus last month versus last year versus 10 years ago, I think this was probably a run-of-the-mill product, if not a pretty average product. And then when we think of these 10 to 20 people that built it, I bet they're great engineers. I bet they crushed it, and it went extremely fast. But you have to remember the scaffolding for them to do that was built on the backs of Meta over 20-ish odd years. So they didn't have to do auth. That was captured by Instagram. Maybe they had an additional side auth, or the entire scaling libraries. Probably half the UI was ported over. So when we say 10 to 20 people built it, sure, we can call it that, but I would like to reimagine that as 1,000 people built it over 20 years, and then 10 people uploaded the latest app store.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
I agree with that, because I think when you have the internet to build the internet, you obviously go faster, right? When the first Facebook was launched, the only way people found out about it in the other schools is when a kid from this school went to the other school and talked about it, right?
Yeah.
But now, the day that Threads was launched, the entire world knew about it, right? So when it was kind of like that. Yeah, it was already an account. It's kind of like how crypto grew, the knowledge about crypto and the knowledge about these technologies. The reasons they grow so fast is because you have the internet to talk about the new things on the internet, right? And so information just flows so fast, and that's why when you look at these charts, the charts are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and not every 2 years somebody beats the target, right? 6 months ago, ChatGPT beat the target. Well, 6 months now these guys beat the target. And I think Brendan's spot on that, and Sam as well, about the pace that you need to keep to do this, that adjusted for these things, it's maybe just a regular launch. But you're going to see this happen again and again and again, the more that we get interconnected.
Yeah. And I also want to point out that I've heard some people saying that Threads feels like a better UX and better app than Twitter, and I think that's absolute BS. I actually found this discussion on Blind. Someone from eBay posted, "Yo, he built this app. Is it running on EC2 Nano or something?" And it's actually really funny, because when you go and you use Threads, I do feel like it takes longer to load. I also feel you can clearly see that you can't search for topics. You also can't actually have a feed only for the people that you follow. In the feed that you have, maybe this is by design, or maybe it's just they didn't have time to implement a following only feed. But in the feed, you have a bunch of people who you never follow, who are just seeding your feed with content. But it's just a funny thing to see here. Totally Russian half-baked. Shock Meta would ship product in this stage. No chronological or following only feed. Can't even search topics. It's called MVP. The V part here is debatable. So the study was kind of just a funny way to capture.
But there's a lesson here, right? The lesson here is for all founders that if Meta can ship something like this and get that network effect running, you should not be spending 9 months perfecting the product, right? This is not the winner of this game, especially today, is not going to be the best product. That's just what it is. Unless it's some infrastructure, super technical solution, then maybe you win on the merits of your product. But for the vast majority of businesses out there, you should be, I say this to entrepreneurs all the time, you should be ashamed of the first version of your product. That's when you know you've gotten it right. If it's perfect and you love it and you're proud of it, I'm sorry, you waited way too long and somebody else got to market and did it faster. So the lesson here is that if a company like Meta can do this and put this out there with all the flaws, and they know the flaws, it's not that this has not been discussed internally. They know this is a problem. But if they can put it out there, the startup has no excuse to drag along their development. They need to get out there, get the network effects, because that's what's going to drive the value, not how perfectly aligned your feed is.
I would actually take the devil's advocate point here. I agree with you totally on this. I just want to make one point that goes against this. I think we're starting to interact with some technologies in which taking that approach of shipping fast and not accounting for all the use cases or not accounting fully for an entire product development cycle is objectively dangerous. And the easiest one is just AI. I think we're, especially when you're building foundational models, I think that big companies like Meta and other big companies shouldn't be adopting this mentality of move fast and release early when it comes to technologies that we're still unsure how they're going to affect society at scale. And I would even add crypto to a degree in that point, right? It's like you don't really know how this technology that you're unleashing in the world is going to impact the world. So I think some caution should be implemented in the process of developing the product. But I think for Twitter or for more like customer facing products or social media products, it's not as important. And I think like I just saw this tweet as well by Jack Dorsey. We wanted flying cars. Instead we got 7 Twitter clones. I think for Twitter clones or for TikTok clones, speed is super important. But when it comes to releasing the next Bard, the next ChatGPT, the next automated drone system, I genuinely think
Oh
that
yeah, of course,
security
Sam. I'm not
thoughtful
saying,
OS is important.
yeah, I'm not
No,
saying
but
release
I wanna
a
draw. I think it's
weapon,
important though.
yeah,
No,
without
I feel
testing.
like
Yeah.
AI. A lot of people wouldn't consider it to be a weapon, right? I think like the same companies that are releasing some of these platforms, Meta is going to be releasing LLMs as well. So if Meta takes the same mentality of, oh, we're just gonna release this super quickly, the same way that we release threads, I think that becomes a dangerous game to play.
Yeah.
So just wanted to make that
No,
caveat.
no, no. I
Yeah.
agree, and like I would actually argue that social media is actually a very dangerous tool, right? Like it shapes like everything from
Yeah.
politics to the military response to wars. Like it shapes everything, so it's actually a very critical thing. The reason I was drawing that contrast was to show that if you're a 5-person team and you're not moving at least at the pace of a 50,000 person team, then you are doing something wrong. I was not saying if you can get 100 million people, if you're creating a product that can affect the lives of 100 million people, you should not be careful. Like, I think actually at that scale, it's your responsibility to be careful. But you will find that there will be a 5-person team that will spend 2 years to build a product just like Threads. And there's just no explanation, no justification for that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Because Threads is going to go out there and all this hate that they're getting is actually feedback from customers, right? Like that's what you want to hear that quickly, and you want to iterate really fast. And so I completely agree with you. Like there's things that need to be done when they are affecting a lot of lives, and when they could affect them very negatively. But for I see pre-seed startups that take 5 years in development, and that's just not necessary, right? Like it's not the right approach.
So strategy wise and market wise, what is your analysis of this? Like what's the strategic analysis of the Threads launch? What do you make of it?
My learning is the same one I've had every few years when it comes out of Meta is just keep copying. Just don't reinvent the wheel. Copy everything, and they just
okay. I do have a few points to make there. I have a few points, but I don't want to let you finish. Go ahead.
I want to show one more launch that happened 2 weeks ago, which kind of went under the radar. So Keith Raboy, super prominent investor over at Founders Fund, founded a company about 3 years ago, Open Store. Allegedly, they were going to go out to compete with Amazon or somewhere in that flavor. They actually just launched on the 26th, and they got tons of, we'll call it feedback. Effectively, the takeaway was, what is this? This looks like the most ghetto version of Amazon. And it was really cool because someone who had every opportunity maybe to like hold off, he has the money, they took $1 billion in funding. Like they could have waited, like you said, Hamiz, 3-4 years before they launched and could have fully tried to copy Amazon. Basically the takeaway is he's coming out and saying, I'm going to stand up for an MVP that I needed to launch. It looks kind of funny, but who knows? we might all be laughing in a year's time when
I think,
sort of folks
yeah,
kind of land
I
and crush
actually
it.
like their approach. I think what's unfortunate that's happening is, regardless of all the flaws, Twitter was supposed to start going in the direction of being more open and less censored, right? And we're actually going back into the path of like more censored and more controlled. And that sits better with the news media. That's why they're all over
Yeah.
it. That sits better with the advertisers. That's why Meta's doing it. And same thing here. Every time we have a competitor to Amazon, that's a way for us as consumers to get more choices. But we want
Yep.
to shoot ourselves in the foot and back the people that give us fewer choices. And that's just unfortunate, but that's how it is.
All right, boys, I
Brendan,
gotta
do you
head
have
out.
your hard stop now? Okay, good to
Yep.
have you. Let's just
Good
wrap up
seeing
here.
y'all.
Good to see you.
Peace, guys.
I wanna show this real quick to the two of you guys. This is probably the best analysis that I've seen so far on Twitter. This is a friend of mine, Alex, also based here in the greatest city in the U.S. Good friend of mine basically just made an interesting thread on his prediction and his analysis of Meta. So it goes basically like this. I'm just gonna walk you through this quickly. So basically
Mhm.
saying Zuck launched this because many people hate Elon. There's a lot of debt at Twitter that is limiting its options, and there's been some recent issues with Twitter and Twitter changes and the way that
Mhm.
Elon is handling Twitter.
Mhm.
So he believes that he's going to achieve the following. He can reach new revenue streams, more locking from brands. And this is something that I've actually seen a lot of people speculating on. They're thinking that the reason why Zuck was launching Threads is because he wants to start generating a lot more text to be able to train Meta's large language models on. Because if you think about it, Meta is really good at um, image data, really good at video data, but they're lacking, and they've been lacking for a minute. The only source of text data that they have is their captions or WhatsApp. And there's some like
But WhatsApp is
sensitive
huge,
things.
Sam. Like WhatsApp,
It's
people
huge.
will
It's huge,
spend
but I
people will spend more time on WhatsApp than they ever do on Twitter, right? Like I will probably send 1,000 lines of text for every one line on WhatsApp for every one line of text that I send
but
on
the comment that I was going to make on
Twitter.
WhatsApp is that I think there's some concerns about using that data because
Yeah.
that's like far more private data than a public post that you make on Twitter, right? So maybe there will be some concerns with using some of that data
He
to train
doesn't care
large
about
language models.
privacy.
I
Zuckerberg
mean,
doesn't care about
he may
privacy.
not. He may not, but the public may, right? If a huge LLM comes out that is superly well trained and there's no text data to be found in Meta other than in WhatsApp, people are just gonna fear. Do you just train
Mm.
this model with WhatsApp with WhatsApp data? And I think that could be like a concern that is gonna reflect in the stock price, and then
Mhm.
therefore the board would care about this. But I
Mhm.
think this is a really interesting take here. That this is another play here is to generate a lot of text for Meta. But he says, however, this is an asymmetric bet. It's a negatively asymmetric bet for Meta. And he's saying he compares the revenue that Meta has generated over the last couple of years, and he compares that with the revenue that Twitter generates. And he says, even if Meta can completely overthrow Twitter and take over the entire market share, it would only represent a 4% revenue increase for Meta's numbers. So he says the opportunity is not big enough for Meta to be doing something here. They would have to like be better than Twitter and by a lot to be able to actually have a representative impact in Meta's revenue, which is
But their
debatable, but I
network,
think it's an interesting take.
yeah, but their network effects are far greater than Twitter ever got, right? So
Yes, but that's also another point that he makes, the network effects here, and saying, yeah, you already have millions and billions of people on your platform, but taking those people away from your platform onto a new platform is actually going to be hurting your revenue. Because if you have a user that starts spending 5 minutes more on threads as opposed to Instagram and consumes X less ads while they're on Instagram because they're now on threads, that's going to be hurting Meta's revenue. So he's also making the argument that this is going to be cannibalizing into into Meta's or Instagram's core revenue, which is an interesting argument as well to make. But I agree with you. The network effects here are infinitely bigger, and there is the opportunity to reach a lot more people. But unless they figure out a clever way to monetize threads immediately and not have that cannibalize against their other products that already drive a lot of revenue,
Mhm.
then this is going to be an
That's
issue.
actually what's like working for them right now. At the same time, the Twitter is becoming uncool because it's starting to charge for things and putting limits on things. People can move over to Threads and it's still cool. There's no ads, there's no subscriptions, there's no nothing. On one side, you have a levered buyout, right? Like, and they need to pay their interest. And it doesn't matter whether Elon Musk wants to do it or not. He has lost 60% of his revenue in the last year from advertising, and advertising made up 90% of their revenue before this. Now what he's trying to do is in the middle of this bullet train, like he wants to take his revenue from being 90% based on advertising to only 50% based on advertising. And he wants the rest of it to come from subscriptions. Now that's a tough sell that makes your platform look uncool, right? And you people coming over here, the threads, there's no ads, there's no nothing. That's just like a cleaner, better Twitter. So it's actually something that is in the social network. Like if you remember, like Mark Zuckerberg was fighting back against his CFO, I forget his name. And the CFO wanted to run ads, and Mark Zuckerberg was like, no, like the reason Facebook works is because it's cool. We're going to run ads once we already get to those numbers. So I think Elon Musk can't afford to not monetize the platform. Meta can afford that, right? And can afford that for many years. And once they've consolidated the market, then there's nobody left. Like there is no competitor when it comes to video, when it comes to text, when it comes to like then you really don't have a competitor, and then you can really squeeze the lemon and make the returns on the back end.
I actually disagree with you. I think Meta can't afford to keep Threads unmonetized for a very long time. I think we're gonna see ads on Threads by the end of Q3, maybe Q4 tops. Because like the point that Alex is making, which I actually agree with, this is actually gonna be cannibalizing Instagram and Facebook's usage and time spent on the platform, which is the most important metrics for the social network. I do think that for this to succeed, Threads need to just start pulling users from Twitter that wouldn't just be only Meta ecosystem users. And I think that's fair. But this is Alex's argument that I somehow agree with, and you almost feel it as well. Like the thing that you use Instagram for is so different than the things that you use Twitter for. At least us, I feel like in our line of work, I feel like we use Twitter for intellectual discussions, sometimes engaging with politics, engaging with like thought leadership, and so on and so forth. And you use Meta, you use Meta and Instagram and Facebook for social things, right? Right now, the bulk of the users in Meta, in Threads, are coming from the current Meta user base. So it's all people who already use Instagram because the Instagram sign-up flow was super simple, a couple clicks and you had the app and you were ready to go. So definitely the bulk of the Threads users right now is Meta-based users or Instagram mainly users. To start pulling in people from Twitter, I think Threads needs to start catering for a different group of people. And I think Twitter does this really well. Twitter, I don't know if naturally or deliberately, became the place for this type of discussions here. It became the place for intellectual content, industry leaders, for anons to basically just express themselves, for a lot of nudity and a lot of creators, and for a lot of political and free speech based debate. Mm-hmm. A lot of that I don't think is going to be moving to Meta or to a Meta-based platform anytime soon. So I think Threads is going to struggle significantly to be able to capture market share and users.
But they don't need to actually do much to really put Twitter in a really tough spot, right? Like Twitter was bought for what, 44, 45 billion. The estimates are like after you lose 60% of your ad revenue, which is essentially all of your revenue, like you're not worth more than 10 or 15 billion now, right? And this was all before this whole thing started, right? So even if they just siphon off 10 or 20% of the core Twitter users, right? Like they will hurt Twitter enough where it will continue to be a 200-300 million person platform. It will continue to have like something like that, but the dominance that it has today on the text-based kind of interaction, I don't know if it'll ever be able to reach that again, because even if they are only slightly successful at kind of splitting up that market, they will still hurt Twitter quite a bit in that process. And at the way that it stands today, Meta has far more financial capital to go fight this fight, right, than anybody else. Let's wrap it up.
Yep. I just want to give a shout out to Alex. Thank you for the thread. It was super insightful. Huge shout out, and you guided the discussion in the pod here. But
absolutely,
yeah, let's wrap it up. Time will tell what happens between Threads and Twitter. But yeah, thank you folks for for joining us in this interesting discussion, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Take care.
Thank you all.